This is Mr. Spiels here. I'm going to be helping you out with the cosine function today. So yesterday and the day before you learned about tangent. Mrs. Kroll's video, which is also posted today, you're going to learn about sine. And then I'm going to be helping you out with cosine. So it doesn't matter which video you watch first today, sine or cosine, either one could come first. But we do know that you've watched, or you do know that you've watched tangent over the last couple days, and we've talked about the acronym SOHCAHTOA, and it's helpful in memorizing or knowing how to find missing sides or missing angles of a right triangle. So you've learned about the TOA part. T stands for tangent, and then O and A stand for your opposite side and your adjacent side. So tangent is equal to opposite over adjacent. Again, sine is going to be taught by Mrs. Kroll today. I'm helping you out with cosine. So C stands for cosine. A stands for adjacent. So I'm going to write ADJ. H stands for hypotenuse. So cosine is equal to your adjacent side over your hypotenuse. Okay, so one other thing that you always want up when you're doing these, whether it's on your phone or on your laptop, is to go to just Google Desmos scientific calculator, and make sure you pull up the scientific calculator. When it does come up, one thing that you want to be sure of is that it's in degrees. So you should be showing degrees right here in the middle of the calculator. If it's not, just make sure you click it so you're in degrees. Okay. So to get us started, just as a quick example here, how you can use cosine. This is saying cosine of an angle is equal to adjacent over hypotenuse, the ratio of the adjacent side over the hypotenuse, which is what we wrote over here, CAH. Okay, so if we're looking at this drawing, cosine of angle A, this is angle A for example, is equal to the adjacent side over the hypotenuse. So what's the adjacent side? Let's think about that. Remember that the side opposite of the angle, okay, would be called the opposite side. Okay, so that would be this side right here. Okay, your hypotenuse is always across from your 90-degree angle. Okay, so that's going to be my hypotenuse. What does that leave us? That leaves us the adjacent side is always the side that's basically right next to, or I guess to use the word adjacent to that angle. Okay, so you have an opposite side, which is always opposite the angle, a hypotenuse, which is always your longest side, and an adjacent side, which is essentially runs along right next to the angle. Okay, so that's what it means by adjacent. So let's use that information and try to solve for missing sides and missing angles on 3 examples here. So following along in your notes, our first step is which trig function should we use? Okay, so the directions here are solve for x. So here's x. Okay, here's my angle. Let's just label our sides. Across from my angle, so I'm going to draw a little arrow right there. Across from my angle would be my opposite side. Across from my 90-degree angle would be my hypotenuse. And then, of course, this would be left. This would be your adjacent side. Okay? So, using that, we're going to plug in our numbers, and we're going to say cosine of 36, right? Cosine of your angle. Cosine 36 is equal to our adjacent side, which we don't know, so that's going to be x, over our hypotenuse, which we do know, which is going to be 50. Okay, and why did I use cosine? So I should go back to step 1 here. Why did I use cosine? Well, I have 36. If I used sine, sine is opposite over hypotenuse. That's not getting me x. Tangent is opposite over adjacent. Well, I don't have the opposite and I don't have the adjacent. So I need at least one of these. So it's not going to be tangent. But cosine gives me the adjacent, which is the x, over the hypotenuse. So the only thing I'm missing is this x. Okay, so to set up our proportion, I'm going to set cosine 36 over 1 because anything divided by 1 is itself. And when you cross multiply, okay, I'm going to get x is equal to, because 1 times x is just x, 50 times cosine 36. Now, when you're doing this, be sure that your constant, your 50, is in front of your trig function. You don't want to plug it into the calculator as cosine 36 times 50 all is 1. You want to keep the 50 out front here, okay? So let's go over to our scientific calculator, and to get an exact answer here, I'm going to say 50 times cosine of 36, and it's, again, it says right here, your answers show up right here. So that's going to be equal to 40.4508, yada, yada, yada. So what I'm going to do is round to the nearest tenth and say that's going to be equal to 40 point, now this says 45. If I'm going to round it to the 10th, I'm going to look at the 4, look at the number next to it. If it's 5 or higher, we're going to add 1. So it's going to be 40.5. Okay, and that's going to be my value for x. Okay, so let's look at this second one. Okay, and let's just label our sides. Across from the 90-degree angle is going to be the hypotenuse. Okay. Across from the angle that we're going to be given here, across from that angle is going to be your opposite side. And then, of course, along or next to the angle is going to be your adjacent side. Okay? So we want to find the value of x. In this case, x is going to be an angle. Okay? So which trig function do we use if we want to find x? Well, let's think about this. If we use sine, opposite over hypotenuse, I'd be missing this, I'd be missing this. That's not going to work. I should only be missing one thing. If I use cosine of the angle, cosine of x would be 7 over 25. I have both of those. Okay, so if I have those, then that's the ticket. We want to use the ones that we have. So let's use cosine. So I'm going to say cosine of x is equal to adjacent over hypotenuse, which is 7 over 25. Okay, so how do we do this? We've got x as our angle. Okay, in this case, x was a side, and that works if you cross multiply and solve for x. However, if x is an angle that you're looking for, what we need to do, if I have some room here, should have given myself some more room, need to multiply both sides by its opposite or its inverse. So the inverse of cosine is cosine inverse. Okay, and that's going to be in our calculator somewhere. So I'm going to multiply both sides by cosine inverse, so that way I'm only left with an x on this side. So I'm going to say x is equal to, it's always helpful to pull the cosine inverse out front, of 7 over 25. Oops, not 22, 25. Okay, so let's see what that comes out to. So let's go over to our scientific calculator. I'm going to clear this out. And to get an inverse, what you do is you click on function, and we're going to say there's the little -1, cosine -1 exponent means cosine inverse. So I'm going to say cosine inverse. I'm going to go back to main. And I'm going to say 7 over 25 is equal to 73 point, and let's round. So we're going to say x is equal to 73.7 degrees. Okay. Remember, when you're looking for an angle, you want to use the inverse function. Okay. Okay, let's do this last one here. So now we want to solve for x, because that's our third step here, solving for x. So what I'll do is I'm going to look, I have an angle here. Okay, I have, let's see, this would be my opposite side. This would be my hypotenuse. This would be my adjacent. Okay, so I have an angle opposite over hypotenuse. That's not going to work. I'm missing my opposite and I'm missing my hypotenuse. Okay, let's try cosine. So katoa. So cosine is adjacent over hypotenuse. Well, that would help me solve for y, but I want to solve for x right now. Adjacent over hypotenuse. So to solve for x, let's look at tangent. Tangent is opposite over adjacent. So if I go opposite over adjacent, I have this, the only thing I'm missing is the x. So tangent 25 would be equal to x over 15. Okay, now just like we did on the first problem, if I put this over 1, I can cross multiply and I can say x is equal to 15 times tangent 25. So let's go to our calculator. 15 times tangent 25, clear all, and let's just do 15 times tangent 25, and that's going to be equal to, let's round up to 7.0. Now, just to finish this, let's solve for y. Okay, let me just divide this out. This was our first problem, just so we kind of have, you know, what's what here. This was our second problem. Okay, now we're on our last one. To solve for y, it looks like we can go back to cosine, right? We have adjacent over hypotenuse. We have the angle, we have the adjacent. The only thing we're missing is the hypotenuse. So I'm going to say cosine of 25 is equal to 15 over y. Let's put this over 1 and let's cross multiply. So I'm going to say y times cosine 25, okay, because I cross multiplied those two, is equal to 15. So what is y going to be equal to? Well, let's go over to our calculator again, and let's do, so now just to backtrack here, to get y by itself, sorry, I should have mentioned this, we want to divide both sides by cosine 25. Okay, so we want to do 15 divided by cosine 25. So in order to do that, let's do parentheses 15 divided by, and now we're going to do cosine of 25, and let's close our parentheses. And that's going to be equal to 16 point, let's round up to 16.6. Okay. All right. Again, these answers will be posted. Go back and watch the video. Slow it down. Stop it if you need to. Mrs. Kroll is also doing sine, so feel free to switch to the sine video when you're ready.